Man, the Clone Saga was a train wreck, wasn't it? Despite the fact that Marvel writers all agreed with this consensus, clones have sadly become a still recurring fixture of the Spidey mythos to this day. To go through every clone that showed up during this saga would take forever. Instead, this list will go over the most notable, important, or just interesting clones that popped up during and after the saga's conclusion, how they showed up, and ultimately what happened to them. With this in mind, I'm Dan from What Culture, and this is what happened to every Spider-Man clone. Number 7. Guardian. In case you're still understandably fuzzy on how this whole mess began, you can blame pretty much all of it on one dude named the Jackal, a truly next level simp who dedicated his life to destroying Spider-Man for the crime of not being able to save Gwen Stacy. And he chose to do this by making a whole bunch of clones for some reason. But of course, when you make multiple clones of the same guy, it's easy to get bored. As such, Jackal made some edits to make each clone stand out. The simplest of these, hence why we're starting with him, was the Guardian. The Guardian was one of the first clones made, which is to say that he was deeply flawed. Cursed with rapid cellular generation, Jackal had to lock him in stasis for later use, otherwise he would die within hours. Such an occasion came when Jackal needed to keep Peter Parker and Ben Reilly occupied for a few minutes, letting the near mindless behemoth out to play. Soon afterward, of course, Guardian died, with his own body giving out on him. Not the most interesting of the clones by a country mile, but his Hulk-like appearance and abilities made for a fun fight scene if nothing else. Number 6. Jack. A slightly more interesting clone from this part of the saga was Jack, the Jackal's right-hand man. I guess that confirms that the Jackal doesn't abide by nicknames in his workplace because Jack is the only place you can go with Jackal, so it would just end up confusing everyone. Anyway, Jack, like Guardian, with whom he shared a close friendship, was a very early clone of Peter, more of a testing phase than anything meant to be concrete. While much more stable than Guardian, that didn't save him from just gradually deteriorating over time. He did get Spidey's powers though, so that's a plus. But not much of one, as they were the first things to go when his body began giving out on him. He found a nice comfy niche as Jackal's right-hand man, thanks to him keeping Peter's immense scientific intellect. But by the time Peter and Ben found him shortly after the death of Guardian, Jack was well on his way out as well. Number 5. Ultimate Carnage. What's not talked about nearly as much as the 616 Clone Saga and the many ripple effects that came from it is when the Ultimate Universe did its own spin on the idea. We have 2 entries to represent Bendis' interpretation of the Clone Saga, the first of which being a very different take on Carnage. Kurt Connors got up to a lot more than just lizard shenanigans in the Ultimate Universe. In fact, we have him to thank for this version of Carnage. In the 616 universe, Carnage was an intentional creation by Venom, but in the Ultimate Universe, Connors actually gets his hands on some of the Venom symbiote. Being apparently a student of the Cave Johnson School of Science, Connors decides that it would be a capital idea to mix the sample of the Venom symbiote that he has with some of Peter's DNA to see what would happen. And Carnage is what happens. Nice going, Kurt. Not exactly a clone in the traditional sense, but seeing as how Peter's DNA is one of the only 2 ingredients in this monster, we're gonna count this one. Ultimate Carnage would go on to cause some trouble, seemingly dying multiple times before finally being put down by Ultimate Venom, who consumed the creature back into itself. Number 4. Ultimate Spider-Woman. In the 616 universe, Jessica Drew, also known as Spider-Woman, has absolutely no relation to Spider-Man whatsoever, a fact that has become a running gag between the 2 characters. But in the Ultimate Universe, Jessica was one of the many clones of Spider-Man, an almost perfect copy of the superhero, apart from one notable hiccup in the process. Instead of the Jackal, we have the CIA to thank for this version of Jessica, who thought fishing Otto Octavius out of jail and forcing him to make Spidey clones for them was a good idea. Jessica came out of the proverbial womb fully formed, complete with all of Peter's memories and morals, which of course led to some good old-fashioned am I a real human/spider person thing angst, but Jessica got over it relatively quickly and soon took up the mantle of Spider-Woman. She became most active after Peter died, trying to live up to the legacy of the hero she was built after. We last saw her at the end of the original Spider-Verse event, and soon after, the Ultimate Universe was put out of its misery, taking her with it. Number 3. The Superior Octopus. As was said earlier, the 616 Spidey canon is still feeling the ripple effects of the Clone Saga, as demonstrated with this entry, the most recent example of cloning Spider-Man, the Superior Octopus. After Superior Spider-Man ran its course, Peter got control of his body again from Doc Ock. However, Otto was always the man with a backup plan, so he had a copy of his consciousness hidden away. After some shenanigans with a returned Jackal, Clone Otto managed to create a proto-clone of Peter's body for him to transfer his consciousness into, becoming what he would later dub the Superior Octopus, with Peter's body and powers and Otto's immense intelligence. For whatever reason, the Superior Octopus would then throw his lot in with Hydra. When they took over the United States, things would end the same way for him as it did for Hydra in that story, with him and the other Hydra Avengers getting curb-stomped by the Odin Son. Number 2. Kane Parker. One of the most fascinating characters to come out of the Clone Saga, and one of the only arguments towards the debacle being worth it is Kane Parker, and even then, that's mostly thanks to what was done with him after the Clone Saga ended. Kane was the very first clone of Peter that Jackal deemed to be successful, but he was cast aside anyway, because his face resembled a pepperoni pizza after getting run over by a dump truck twice. Kane would spend the next few years brooding and being all mysterious, but in the years that followed the Clone Saga's conclusion, he would end up having one of the most fascinating journeys of any Spider-Man character. What started out as a mysterious new villain, solely created to drum up interest in a failing book, slowly morphed into an anti-hero with a strong moral centre, always trying to be the better person. Kane currently holds the mantle of Scarlet Spider and is trying his best to be a hero worthy of that title. Number 1. Ben Reilly. The one that started it all. Ben Reilly has had quite the journey in the decades he's been around. In the beginning, he was just a clone. Introduced as that and only that by Jerry Conway when he first introduced the Jackal. But then, Ben came back in the 90s as the Scarlet Spider, and soon afterward, the Clone Saga began in earnest. During this time, Ben Reilly was at his most hated as a character, mostly due to it being transparently obvious that this whole thing was just Marvel trying to replace Peter as Spider-Man, so they didn't have to have a married Spider-Man as the main character. That didn't take, of course, but Ben was still kicking around, so for a while, they just killed him off and called it good. After several instances of him coming back, and then dying, and then coming back again, and then him being the Jackal? But we don't talk about that. We finally come to the present day, where he and Peter basically coexist as equals, to the point where Ben is an active player in the current Devil's Reign storyline. And that's our list. Let us know who your favourite clone is in the comment section below. You can follow me on Twitter at DanJDurkin. And after that, be sure to swing by whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. For now though, I've been Dan, and I'll catch you in the next one.